Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our first monthly call of 2026. We'll get the state of the climate with Steve Vavrus here tonight. So, as we continue to admit folks, welcome, welcome, welcome. As you come in and as we get everybody in here, we'd love to see where everybody's coming in from tonight. It's a new year. We may have some new folks, may have some old friends that we just haven't seen in a while over the holidays. So please drop in the chat where you're joining us from tonight. Keep on coming in. Keep on coming in. Good turnout for the start of the year.
Why did you switch this and everything?
No.
It's good to have everybody on tonight for our opening of the year conversation with Dr. Steve Vavrus, who's our state climatologist of Wisconsin. I'm the Reverend Wade Halva. I'm our Associate Director of Programs here at Faith in Place, based down in Marion, Illinois. As we get started, we do have some pieces of housekeeping to go through. Remind you who we are, what we're about, and how we're going to do this meeting and most of our meetings. So that'll start here in a moment. There we go. Our mission is to cultivate a powerful multi-faith movement working for environmental justice through connection, education, and advocacy. Our vision is that spiritual communities are the ones leading the way in healing our relationships with each other and the earth to build just, resilient, thriving communities. We work in Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin. And of course, we'd love to have you on if you are outside of those three states. Some of our norms, we are a multi-faith community, so please respect one another. Listen to understand, because we don't always have clear answers. Take space and make space. Hold space for everybody to speak and share. Please do mute yourself when not speaking. And then ask for help. If you need help with technical things, please send a message to Faith in Place in the Zoom participants, and they will be able to help you. Right now, I'm going to ask you to rename yourself so that later on, when we go into state-based breakout rooms, that'll be easier for our comms team to do. So if you mouse over your picture, you should get three dots in the upper right-hand corner. Click on those and choose rename. Then if you can add a region number before your name, you can see it on my name as a 1 and a dash because I'm in Illinois. Our next slide is our listing of regions, and those are dropped in the chat as well. 1 is Illinois, 2 is Indiana, 3 is Wisconsin, 4 is none of the above. So we'll give you a moment to do that, and you can do that throughout the meeting until we break into breakout rooms. And then if that doesn't work for you, we can put things in the chat in our from Marion, Illinois. I want us to think about where we are a bit differently. We're each on land that we are not the only occupants of. Over time, many have lived where we are. Each of them and each of us has shaped the land and the environment through their interaction. Some of this we know in great detail. Others we only know the names or the names of communities. Still others we know very little about. They've all held the land and shaped the environments we now call home. Here in far downstate Illinois, there have been settlers, and the streets of the town are named after them. For them, the Quapaw, Osage, Miamia, Oglala Sioux, Kaskaskia, and Kickapoo. For them, this was the land of the mound builders, the Mississippians who built the city of Cahokia, and we've lost the names and the stories of those who came before them. After us will come our children and grandchildren and their children and grandchildren. Your grandchildren may move to where I am. Mine may move to where you are. How the land is shaped when they arrive will dictate how they live. Some have left deep marks on the land, and others have barely disturbed the land in their passing. We've much to learn from those who pass gently for our own passage over the land. The land I call home has been gouged deeply to mine for coal and extract oil. The rivers have been rerouted, the trees cut down and sent downstream. The land has been farmed to exhaustion and replanted with forest, and the landscape has changed from footpaths and horse trails to river and railroad and now to interstate highways, from small family farms to wide expanses of corn and soy. We've moved from walkable small towns to needing a car to get anywhere and everywhere. From gathering food in our backyards or small markets, we now drive to a grocery store, convenience store, liquor store, or a
Mhm.
Dollar General to buy food that's been trucked in from all over. Now, fields that have grown food grow corn for ethanol and soy for biodiesel and are moving to solar energy and agrivoltaics. The sign of our presence are all around us. Stepping out into winter, early evening darkness, and I can see the stars. More than some of you in cities and less than those seen by the people who came before us. And in this season, my faith talks about magi who follow a star to find hope, to find salvation, to find one known as the Prince of Peace, seeking a world around what should be, not what is. So as we enter our time tonight to talk about the state of the climate, I want us to be able to take a moment and take a deep breath. The state of the world is full of chaos and things to trouble our souls, globally, nationally, and locally. So I want to invite you to close your eyes and take a deep breath and think about some things. What would you follow a star to find? Put in your mind the place you go when you are looking for peace, place that brings you peace. And then add to that picture who goes with you, who grounds you, who helps you find peace in the world. I want you to imagine what is one small thing that would give you peace. And then what is one small thing that would make your community healthier, more peaceful, more welcoming, more home? What do you need for your peace? And what can you give your community for peace? As we begin now, I'm privileged to turn things over to Toma for our Faith in Place update.
Thank you, Wade. Good evening, everyone. I'm Toma Langston, the Senior Director of Finance and Operations at Faith in Place. I use he, him, his pronouns. Happy 2026 to you all. I wanted to share a few announcements that we're excited about. Last month, we hosted our board and staff retreat in Madison, Wisconsin. The retreat was a major success, strengthening cross-state collaboration and energizing our shared work. Uh, During the retreat, we celebrated the exciting news of our Indiana redistricting victory, a pivotal win for fair maps and civic representation. This marks a powerful milestone in our advocacy journey, so yay for that. In 2026, we are actively preparing for upcoming state advocacy campaigns across Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin, with a strong focus on coordinated midterm civic engagement and community mobilization. We also want to highlight that Indiana Renewable Energy Day is January 20th, 2026. This will be a key advocacy moment centered on, on advancing renewable energy policy and public support in Indiana. And last I have for you is finally we're thrilled to share our April week of action taking place from April 18th through April 23rd. This is a multi-day, multi-state advocacy and activation week with opportunities for participation at every level. We'll continue to share ways to plug in, lead, and amplify impact as plans finalize. And now tonight we have the honor of hearing from one of the Midwest's most trusted climate experts, Dr. Steve Vavrus. Steve serves as the State Climatologist of Wisconsin and is the senior scientist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison's Division of Extension and the Nielsen Institute Center for Climate Research. He is an expert on Wisconsin climatology, extreme weather, global climate change, and Arctic climate. Steve also serves as co-director of the Wisconsin Initiative on Climate Change Impacts and chairs its climate working group. He earned a master's degree and PhD in atmospheric sciences from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and received a bachelor's degree in meteorology from Purdue University. We are grateful to have Steve's voice, research, and leadership with us this evening. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Steve Vavrus.
Thank you so much, Toma, and I will share my screen here. Okay, and just shout if there's any sort of technical problems here. So first, let me thank Faith in Place for this great invitation. I'm happy to speak with you, and this is really a two-part presentation. The first is my pretty sciencey talk on climate change, but I'm actually more interested in hearing your faith perspectives on this topic that's really important to me and, of course, to all of us. So 2025 brought a lot of things in the world. It certainly brought a lot of weather and climate news. It's easy to forget what happened a year ago, but we were dealing with devastating wildfires in California, one of the most devastating, costliest wildfires in US history. And then not that long after, Europe was dealing with a major heat wave. And then in the fall, Melissa blew up as a major Category 5 hurricane, in part fueled by the heat from climate change in the oceans. And then later in the fall, we had the big IPCC COP30 conference in Brazil. And then we can't get away from the politics of 2025, can we? In this country, the Energy Department telling employees not to use the words climate change and green. But meanwhile, the planet continued to warm. And one of the disadvantages of my giving this presentation the first week of January is that we don't have enough data yet for 2025. So I'm going to rely on the previous year and show 2024. This is what the world looked like in terms of its temperature departures from the long-term normal. So 2024 was memorable because it was the warmest year on record, going back to the 1800s. And you can see very intuitively that on this map, the warmer colors were warmer, the most warmer than normal. And you are hard pressed to find any parts of the world that were not warmer than normal. And that was certainly true of land areas. And it was certainly true here in North America, bright red in where we are in the upper Midwest. Now, I did not cherry pick 2024 as a special year. To put it in perspective, we have long-term global temperature records dating back to about 1850 pretty reliably. And that's what I'm showing here. And it's all relative to the average from the late 1800s. So that's the baseline here, the zero. And this is in degrees Celsius. And you notice that there's just natural fluctuations from year to year in blue and the black dots, but the red captures the long-term trend pretty well. And we can see very clearly that there was a big ramp up, a real inflection point starting in the 1970s. And thereafter, it's been a fairly steady warming trend until we get here to the final 2 years of the data, 2024 on top, and not far behind was 2023. And it, by all estimates, 2025 is going to go down as either the second or third warmest year on record. And so we're staying up at this plateau. And I put this 1.5 degrees Celsius line because that's the threshold at which many scientists think we're going to be seeing the worst impacts of climate change. It's not a step jump. We don't fall off a cliff at 1.5 degrees, but that's where we get more concerned about the impacts. And unfortunately, we've had 2 years in a row above that threshold, and we're likely going to see a third soon. It's no secret what's causing this long-term warming trend. I don't think I need to elaborate with this audience too much. We're putting in more heat-trapping pollution into the atmosphere. It's been well measured. CO2 has been extremely well measured since the 1950s. Here we are this week. I just checked. We're at 428 parts per million. And to put that into perspective, historically, when we look at air bubbles trapped in the ice cores of Antarctica, we can go back hundreds of thousands of years, and we know that the natural ceiling is about 300 parts per million. We've blown past 300, we've blown past 400, we're all the way up to 428 as I speak. So it's not just the numbers, it's really the impacts that matter, right? And if people ask me, or when people ask me, what are my biggest concerns about climate change? I was thinking I would put these three at the top of my list, things that I can lose sleep over. One is more extreme heat. The other is stronger storms. And the third is sea level rise. And I'll get to next in the next slides why I feel that these make the top of the list. First of all, extreme heat. Heat is the deadliest weather hazard in the US. It kills more people each year than any other weather disaster, even more than high-profile events like tornadoes and hurricanes. But it kills people in ones and twos, so it doesn't make big news typically. But that is already, and has been for many years, the biggest weather killer. So it stands to reason in a warming climate, we should be concerned about more heat and extreme heat. And we're already seeing the fingerprint of that. This was a study that came out last year that calculated the number of hot days in any location that's been added by climate change during the past year. So this is the 10% warmest days in any location. And the question is, how many more of these hot days over time have been added or in that year? And you see that everything is positive. So climate change has been adding to these hot days, but especially in certain parts of the world, like the tropics. The hottest parts of the world are seeing the biggest increase, but the other areas have been experiencing this too. We go northward to Europe, all the way to Norway, increases, Greenland, Canada, and parts of the US. So this is something that's affecting the entire world and already, and to say nothing of where we're heading in the future. The second point is about storms and getting stormier or storms getting stronger. And the reason really stems back to basic earth sciences. This looks like a figure that could come out of a high school earth science textbook. It's the water cycle. We understand it well. We know that we get evaporation from the land, we get evaporation from lakes, streams, ocean, crops, trees, and so on. That moisture gets into the atmosphere. Some of it condenses to form clouds. Some of those clouds form raindrops. Rain falls, runs off, it gets into replenishes the groundwater, replenishes the soils with moisture and so forth. The issue, though, is that in a warming climate, all of this water cycle strengthens. It's like the water cycle on steroids when we have a warming climate. In that case, we get more evaporation from the land surface, more moisture is in the atmosphere when we get conditions right for heavy rainfalls. So that means we can get stronger flooding types of rainfalls, and then stronger surface runoff that can cause damage as well in terms of major impacts. So that's kind of setting the stage here. And in my state of Wisconsin, we've seen this firsthand. The 20 teens were Wisconsin's wettest decade on record. And we had lots of really, really heavy rainfalls during that decade, the so-called 100-year daily rainfalls. These are events that are so intense that we expect them to happen only once per century on average in a stable climate. But instead, Wisconsin had 21 of these different rainstorms during the 20 teens decade. And you can see here where they occurred, and you can see how much fell in a day at these locations. In one instance, up to a foot of rain in one day. And I should add that we just set a new state record in Milwaukee in August of last year with 14 and a half inches of rain in one day, most of that falling within just 10 hours. So these are staggering rainfall amounts. And yes, we've had rainfalls that were heavy in the past, but we certainly know that we're getting more of these right now. This is what 100-year rainfalls do. Not surprisingly, they cause a tremendous amount of infrastructure damage. These are just instances of road washouts, building damages. Flooding in Madison, unfortunately, took the life of one man who was swept away. So these have real world consequences. And so, of course, we need to take them seriously. And the conditions are right in a warming climate for more intense rainstorms. The third major impact I'll address is sea level rise. And the reason this makes the list in part is because it's a virtual certainty in a warming climate that global sea levels will rise. And
What?
the reason is that ocean levels, the ocean, like any fluid, expands when it's heated. So that raises the sea levels, number one. And a warming climate can melt snow and ice on land, dumping more water mass into the ocean, and that raises levels too. We have pretty good measurements back to the late 1800s. And from this, in this graph, you can see a pretty steady global sea level rise of about 10 inches, so nearly a foot. It matters a lot where you are. Some places have seen a bigger rise, some places a smaller rise, just depending on tectonics and other factors. But we're definitely on the upward swing, and estimates from the IPCC suggest that by 2100, we could be seeing about a 3-foot rise compared to year 2000. So this is really just the beginning. One reason this is so practically important is because people around the world disproportionately live on coastlines. I mean, maybe that's obvious. They're nice places to live most of the time. They give you access to the water, beaches, and temperate climates and whatnot. But they do make us more vulnerable when we have a sea level rise. And here's just one example. All these dots represent coastal cities of more than 1 million people. And that's a lot. And it's not just in North America, it's all over the world. So anything that threatens that many people is of great societal concern. Closer to home, right here in this country, we've seen a striking increase in something that goes by various names. It's called tidal flooding or nuisance flooding or sunny day flooding. This is the type of flooding that's not caused by a heavy rainstorm or hurricane. This is simply because our ocean sea levels are creeping upward and inundating coastal communities. An example here that I'm showing from Virginia is the number of these, they call them coastal flooding or high tide flood days. You see that they were very infrequent back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, but they've really been ramping up in recent years, especially in the past decade. So, it's something that's almost predictable, people having troubles with flooded streets, communities dealing with infrastructure damage, and so on. Now, I know this group is very concerned with environmental justice, and climate justice, or climate injustice, as I like to call it, is one component of that. And people probably have different definitions of climate justice. A couple working definitions I like to use is climate injustice is when people less responsible for climate change are more affected by it. And another one is regardless of who's responsible for climate change, some people are simply less able to adapt to the impacts than others. So I'll give a couple examples here of each of those. First of all, in terms of the disconnect between contributors to climate change and those feeling the impacts, I'm showing this interesting looking global map that was put together by a couple of my colleagues at University of Wisconsin, Holly Gibbs and Jonathan Patz, in a study many years ago. It's showing a distorted map of the world because it's showing the proportion of the global CO2 emissions contributed by each country. So the United States gets real fat in this map because we contribute a lot per person. Other parts of the world, other continents, in fact, whole continents like Africa become very, very small because they contribute very little in relative terms. And then what Holly and Jonathan did is that they created a different map and said, what are the impacts of climate change in terms of mortality? and everything kind of flips. So places like the United States that are relatively well equipped to handle the impacts of climate change compared to other countries becomes very small. And Africa in particular, India secondarily, become much, much bigger. And admittedly, this study was done nearly 20 years ago now, so we need to update the numbers. China has emerged as the #1 carbon emitter since then, but the message is still the same. There is a big disparity between the countries and the people who emit the most and therefore contribute the most to climate change and those who are feeling the major impacts. Rising sea levels for certain communities really is an existential threat. Certain Pacific Island states are projected to potentially become uninhabitable before the end of this century due to rising sea levels and that saltwater inundation. And we can quibble with how this was done or which estimate of sea level was used and whatnot. But the main point here is that these Pacific Island states contribute next to nothing in terms of global greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, it's a fraction of a percent. And yet they are feeling firsthand or will feel firsthand, especially down the road, probably the biggest impacts and threats to their way of life and their locations. In terms of the second part of climate injustice, of not everybody feels the same impacts or can cope with impacts equally. Here's an example from a heat wave in my state, in Wisconsin. This was a Milwaukee heat wave from 3 or 4 years ago. It was intensively studied by a group of citizen scientists who monitored the heat during the heat wave all across Milwaukee. And you can see it's color coded according to location. The red is parts of the city that were the hottest. The lighter colors were relatively cooler. And it's pretty clear to see that the central part of Milwaukee was bright red. That was the hottest. It was about 88 degrees in the evening, so pretty sweltering if you don't have air conditioning. But then I'm going to put right next to it a map that was made separately from the heat wave by the Wisconsin Department of Health Services, and it shows heat vulnerability. This is societal heat vulnerability based on demographic information, age, health, income, various factors that are correlated with the ability of people to withstand extreme heat. You don't want to be in the brown area because brown means you have high heat vulnerability. And you can see pretty clearly that there is a strong correlation between the middle part of Milwaukee that got the hottest during this heat wave and typically does during heat waves because of the urban heat island, and then the areas of Milwaukee that have the most vulnerable populations. So this is a concern. You know, the central part of cities tend to get hotter anyway. And in this case, it happens to be inhabited by people who are disproportionately less able to cope with that extreme heat. Now I want to transition into a more hopeful part of my talk. I know that climate change is a sobering topic. It's hard for us to stay positive, but I'm going to make the case, first of all, that we are not the dinosaurs looking at the killer asteroid about to destroy us 67 million years ago. We have agency. The dinosaurs did not. They had an external threat. We have a threat that we created and we can do something about. Some positive signs, and the reason I feel this way, one of the biggest is that there has been a really big drop in the price, the cost of renewable energy. And this is no secret. I'm not the first to notice this, but it's staggering, and it's worth reminding ourselves just how much the prices have dropped. 54% drop in the past decade here, I'm showing, in the cost of solar power overall. Solar voltaic drop even more, 75%. Offshore and onshore wind energy has dropped by more than 60%, bioenergy about 20%. So regardless of the rhetoric we hear from some politicians, we're not going back. Renewable energy has become cost competitive and even more cost competitive than coal. And so this is a hopeful sign that the market forces are driving us in a way that is going to reduce carbon emissions, especially so in China. China is going whole hog on renewable energy and exporting a lot of that technology around the world. And as a milestone here to show this point about renewable energy generation, this did not make big news, but it should have. Last fall, For the first time, renewable energy overtook coal as the primary source of electricity around the world. Hooray! The first time since the Industrial Revolution. And we're going to continue going in that path. So, we should pat ourselves on the back that things are, in this case, are definitely going in a very favorable way. Another reason for some hope is that we've learned a lot about how to deal with certain kinds of disasters, extreme weather disasters, especially heat. Um, Especially since some of the early heat waves that produced a lot of deaths decades ago, communities have put together these heat wave action plans, fostered by groups like the EPA, and they have common sense strategies. Things like publicizing heat wave forecasts. We're never caught off guard anymore by a major heat wave. The Weather Service forecasts have gotten so good that we know a heat wave's coming days, if not a week or two in advance, so we can warn people. Public cooling centers can be very helpful for people who don't have air conditioning, as long as we can get those people to the cooling centers, whether they're unhoused or people who just don't have air conditioning in their homes. We know who the vulnerable populations are in heat waves. It's the elder, it's the very old, it's the very young, it's the socially isolated, and it's the people who are on a lot of medications. So we can target them. Just checking on your neighbor, those neighbors in particular, can be very effective. And then at the other extreme, advocating for worker protections. The young, healthy, strong people are often the ones who have the greatest exposure on their jobs, doing construction work, for example. So they need protection from extreme heat too. A really nice example here of how heat wave action plans are benefiting the country comes from Chicago. A good example for this audience, the famous, infamous now 1995 heat wave killed over 700 people. The city of Chicago really did not take it seriously at that time, nor did many other communities. 2012, we had a comparably severe heat wave, over 100 degrees for several days. There were only, what I saw were 18 deaths, a factor of 40 smaller than the 1995 heat wave. That is fantastic. And the more we learn about how to deal with extreme heat, hopefully the more those numbers will drop. My own feeling is that no one should die from extreme heat. That is, those heat wave deaths are completely preventable. And then transitioning to another part of why I feel some optimism, we've learned more and more about what are the most powerful levers when it comes to mitigating climate change, reducing carbon emissions. There was a New York Times bestseller that came out in the late 2010s called Drawdown. And it spawned a group called Project Drawdown that still exists. And it got together scientists and policymakers from around the world to sit together and create the most no regret strategies, the most substantive existing solutions to address climate change. And it went a step further. It said, not just the 100 best solutions in a laundry list, we want you to rank them according to how strong their levers are. And so they did this. And they've come up with a couple different lists over time, but the most recent one I found is this one. This is Project Drawdown's suggested list of the top 10 steps we can take to limit global warming by 2 degrees Celsius by year 2100. And I think it's fascinating, this top 10 list. It's counterintuitive in some ways, but not so counterintuitive in others. So let me walk you through it. The number one lever that they identified was reducing food waste. I would not have guessed that. I don't think most of us would. And I think that that's a great one because nobody wants to waste food. We don't want to waste it for economic reasons, for moral reasons, and now for climatic reasons. Food production is such a huge carbon emitter overall that anything we can do to reduce that food waste has a big impact on the climate. A second one that's food related is shifting more toward plant-rich diets. Doesn't mean everybody becomes a vegan, but people who eat meat or eat a lot of meat eat less meat or eat certain kinds of meat that produce fewer carbon emissions. Family planning and education made it near the top of the list regarding population growth. A couple that really were kind of esoteric were involved refrigerants, refrigerant management and alternative refrigerants, because the coolants that go into refrigerants are extremely powerful greenhouse gases, way more powerful than CO2. So if those leak into the atmosphere, they trap a lot of heat. And then some of these ideas in the top 10, we probably would have come up with deforestation, reforestation, photovoltaics of both kinds, and onshore wind turbines. Another one here that made the top 10 list, clean cooking stoves, especially in developing countries. Those are a major source of carbon emissions. So I think this offers great hope. It helps to prioritize what things we can do to have the biggest bang for our buck in terms of climate change. And now I'm going to end on a personal note. I am not one who's typically big on New Year's resolutions. I figure if you don't make them, you can't break them. But in recent years, I have tried to adopt this one. Uh, there is a lot to bark about in the world, and it's okay, I think, to bark, but we can't forget to wag. We've got to make sure that we bring happiness to this, and it's not only because it'll help our mood, but it'll help the cause. And I just came across a really inspiring essay by a man by the name of Rhett Butler, and that is from Gone with the Wind fame. But the 21st century version of him is the creator of Mongabay, Conservation and Environmental News Service. And he wrote an essay recently, and I've got the QR code if you want to look at the whole thing. The whole point is optimism, he says, is not a mood, it is a method. And what he means by that is that we need to be optimistic. We need to record our victories, even small ones, because they pile up, kind of like the renewable energy, drip by drip by drip. They make a difference. And over time, they can exert a very strong lever, in this case, when it comes to climate change, or more generally in his discourse in terms of conservation and environmental issues writ large. So I will stop there with my 25 minutes or so and be happy to hear comments from all of you, and um, questions about my talk or comments that you have, and just carry on this discussion for the next 15 or 20 minutes.
Thank you, Steve. I get to pepper you with the questions from the Q&A, and as you can see on the screen, we've got a way to do that online. You can also drop them into the chat. I'm going to start with one that I think has a quick example based on your top 10 list back there. What do you recommend we focus on, thinking about particular actions and advocacy we can do from where we are?
Well, I've really been promoting the food waste one, because that's one that we can do immediately. I mean, like tonight, look at your refrigerator, try to do a better job of um, uh, avoiding food waste ourselves. But of course, individual actions trying to cook without wasting food, that is the drip 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 that we need, but we need it at a much bigger scale too. Working together, trying to do things on a more societal scale is important too. Another important one I tell people is to vote. That is one way that we can express our opinions. Climate is not the only issue that we vote on, but it is one of many. And if you want to have a say, even a small say, that's something that we can do. Another one that made the top 10 list there was shifting toward more plant-based diets. I think it's important, though, not to be preachy about this and say, oh, you're eating meat, you're a bad person. That's not at all the case. What that is pushing for is simply kind of on the spectrum of, say, meat eating. Shifting toward a more plant-based diet is healthier in general. And depending on the type of meat, it can also reduce one's carbon footprint. So I think these are all things, individual actions, and then groups like yours working collectively, where you have much more synergy because you are working in tandem rather than just as individuals. But I don't think it's an either or. This is an all hands on deck crisis that we're dealing with when it comes to climate change. We need to have both approaches.
Yeah, one of the statistics that blew my mind when I joined Faith in Place was finding out where in the process our food waste was.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
83% of it is after it gets to us, the end consumer. And
Yeah.
sometimes my fridge fully validates that, but I've been working on it really hard.
All of us,
Um,
yeah, we all have things we can work on, and that does depend on where in the world you live, what proportion comes at different points in the food chain. But this kind of approach, analyzing things, where are the sources of these waste that we need to fix? That's a great rational approach.
One of our next questions ties into what you were just saying is many of our drawdown solutions are personal when fossil fuel industry and outputs are still the big primary systemic issue. How do we tackle that elimination of fossil fuel?
Well, as I pointed out, there's already a lot of good direction going in terms of cleaner energy sources. And I know it's easy to sort of bash fossil fuel companies, but they are providing something that we're all demanding. And so anything we can do to reduce the demand individually and collectively means that they're contributing less in terms of the total pollution. So I think those are really important steps that we can all take. And each person has a different individual carbon footprint. If you're a homeowner, if you live miles away from your workplace, it changes depending on where you are. It changes during the course of one's life. Somebody who's retired is no longer commuting into work, for instance. So we need to just take stock of ourselves individually, and then again, teaming up with others like this group does to have a more collective impact.
Next up is how do you think we can combat the natural disaster myth that attempts to ignore the fact a lot of these changes are man-made and mitigated? How do we do that collective shift?
Yeah, if I understand the question, it's not just attributing a natural disaster to, oh well, it just happened kind of thing, right? Yeah, so this is something that natural hazard experts, which I am not, have really harped on, that we should not use that term natural hazard anymore because really in terms of the damage from things like earthquakes or wildfires or floods, the actual damage is not natural. It is very much intertwined with what society does in terms of preparing or recovering from it. And so I think that all of us need that constant reminder because we've been trained to even use that term, natural disasters or natural hazards. But more and more, with humans having a bigger input on things or footprint on things, we see that very much that the any sort of disaster has a natural component and it has a human component too.
Yeah, in the insurance industry, those things are not natural disasters. They're acts of God, which has a particular flavor for a faith-based community to
Yeah, yeah,
think
that's an
about that
interesting
that way.
terminology there.
Um, Moving to a couple more local ones. In contrast to sea level rise, what's the impact on the Great Lakes that are near and dear to many of us on the call's hearts?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a lot trickier when it comes to the Great Lakes. You might think it'd be easier because it's a smaller body of water, but it isn't. I get asked a lot, simply, are the Great Lakes going to go up or down as a result of climate change? And we don't really even know that because there are reasons why it should go up. Heavier rainstorms, for example, should put more moisture, more water into the lakes. But on the other hand, there's greater evaporation in a warming climate, which should draw the lake levels down. And so, who's going to win that tug of war is not exactly clear. In the past decade, those of you who pay attention to the Great Lakes or who have spent much time near there have seen a dramatic shift from very, very low levels in the early 20 teens to near record high levels by 2020. It's entirely possible that we're going to be seeing more of these swings as both sides of rising levels and falling levels compete with each other in this changing climate. But that I would say is really a wild card, even though it has great implications. We all want to know the answer, but at this point, it's still an important research question that's being studied.
Yeah, where I am, we've been able to walk across the Mississippi River the last four falls due to drought
Right.
levels, which is just mind-boggling to hear about the mighty Mississippi, and then, oh, sure, you could walk across that thing. Um,
Yeah, and that's a great point, Wade. And one of the things, one of the consequences of climate change that I have not gotten into tonight so far is this idea of greater precipitation whiplash or weather whiplash, and going from extreme drought to flooding and back and forth. We've seen so much of that in the upper Midwest in recent years. And climate models suggest that we'll see more of that in the future. So it may not be just like, oh, we need to prepare for a wetter climate or a drier climate. We may need to prepare for both of those at the same time.
We are definitely seeing that down here in far downstate,
Mm,
Illinois. We've
yeah.
got another question that's kind of coming at the same thing from two different directions. We've got a retired urban planner who's very interested in this on like municipal policy and ordinance, and then a community member who's very interested in like just how do we do this? So, do you have recommendations for how we can make our communities more resilient given the impacts of climate change?
Yeah, that's a question for people other than me, but I will say that there are lots of people addressing that question and tackling it. In my network, Wiki, the Wisconsin Initiative on Climate Change Impacts, we have 14 different working groups, and some of those include people with expertise on this topic. We have a community sustainability working group, for example, and they deal with questions like that. We have an infrastructure working group, and they too deal with questions like that. So each community is different. Some communities are more prone to flooding. Others, or major urban centers need to be concerned about that urban heat island. So it definitely depends on each community needs to address it themselves. But that's sort of a wishy-washy answer. But in part, I'm not an expert, but a lot of people are addressing this, and I do know that one size does not fit all when it comes to that question.
Is there a sense, some of my communities are really engaging around that, and others feel like they have bigger concerns. And some places it's blended in the two. So when I'm working in East St. Louis, huge sewer issues related to stormwater, rainwater, flooding, um, and it all gets meshed together. Do you have any sense in terms of how we get people to think about them all together? Or I feel like sometimes we break it up into too many little chunks and don't see how they connect.
You mean different infrastructure components, for instance?
Yes.
Yeah, well, that's probably true. I mean, we're too siloed as a society anyway, aren't we? In many examples. But in terms of emphasizing the importance of it, a colleague just sent me a blurb from USA today, that said that the FEMA has handed out $195 million to homeowners because of that flood last August. And that just shocks me that it's that big a number. And, that was a 14.5 inch rainfall, so it's going to do a lot of damage. But it's a reminder of just how expensive these events can be. And, had Milwaukee been better prepared, if they could have been better prepared, that number would have been smaller. It still would have been really big. But when you're talking, if you can even cut in half or cut in 10% some of these damages from the really worst disasters, that can have a large absolute change, a large positive absolute effect.
Certainly. We've got a couple questions related to federal government stuff that I'm going to try to pull together. Um, will our government continue to fund the Mauna Loa Observatory? What's the impact of shutting down NCAR? And then, do you feel confident that climatologists will have the data needed with NOAA having reduced resources? So, like, kind of what do you perceive the current federal situation for some of our knowledge, our ability to respond, prepare?
Yeah, boy, I don't think anyone has a crystal ball on this. A year ago, I heard some worries from colleagues about what might happen, and I dismissed them. I thought they were crying wolf. I thought, oh, it won't be that bad. We've seen it be that bad in some cases, and this questions about Mauna Loa continued funding. I have not heard the latest on that. I have heard that cuts to that have been threatened. There are other places we measure carbon dioxide in the atmosphere around the world, so some of those measurements could be picked up, but you never want to lose a multi-decade record. Um, the NCAR, NCAR, that's the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Colorado. I have a personal connection with that. I collaborate with them constantly. I've worked out there as a visiting scientist. They're some of the best atmospheric scientists in the country, some of them some of the best in the world. And it would be a huge loss to our society and even have global implications in terms of the knowledge that we would lose and the measurements that we would lose if that center is closed. I am optimistic that in the end that won't happen. I feel like there's just not broad support across the political aisles for that to happen. NCAR has too good a reputation. So maybe I'm overly optimistic on that one, but I do feel in the end that that will not happen. And I'm certainly hopeful of that.
That's great. I'm just watching our chat, and we've got so many great resources coming through the chat that I hope our comms team's grabbing, and we'll send out the follow-up email. But if you haven't been paying attention to the chat, there's some great places that people could pick up on things that are being done locally and happening now, which is great because sometimes we miss things that aren't in our sphere of influence or our commute range.
Yeah,
Um,
well, I'm sure this is a very well-informed audience. I'd like to look at that chat and learn some things too, because like with all of us, there's information overload on the web. Even if you kind of keep track with any issue, you're always surprised. Oh, I never knew about that. So that's another reason it's great to have these meetings and share knowledge.
I think we are about to our call to action tonight and about to send to breakout rooms. But before, I want to give you just one chance to, you were saying, wag more, bark less. My kids just got back from Hamilton, so smile more, talk less. What's kind of the message on the way out the door you want to give this group in terms of the wag more, bark less sense of things?
Yeah, well, I think that the point going back to the dinosaurs, I like to make the point that we have agency. You know, this is a problem or crisis, an issue, whatever, however you want to call it, that we humans created, and we have the ability intellectually and in terms of motivation and our social powers of working together to do something about it. And we don't want to get bogged down in the day-to-day rhetoric that comes out in the news, even though it's hard not to sometimes. That's why looking at these big picture trends, things like Rhett Butler and his group emphasize, I think is really healthy. I think we all need it both for our mood, but also to help advance the cause. That we don't want to get caught up in the weeds. We want to look at the light at the end of the tunnel that I think we are working toward.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Folks, I'd love for you to share your appreciation for Steve and what he shared with us tonight, particularly moving that focus to what we can do and being hopeful optimists in our communities, wagging more than barking. Um, we're going to start moving to our breakout rooms where we'll talk by state for a little bit. Please do, if you're in Indiana, sign up for Renewable Energy Day. If your House of Worship is connected with us as a green team, your coaches will be getting to you about Action Week coming up in the spring. And if there are things that you are interested in learning about from this, please do reach out to us and we'll see what we can connect you with in your community. And if it doesn't exist, we'll have that conversation about how to make it exist where you are. So, comms team is sending us out to breakout rooms. Thank you all.
Breakout rooms are now open. There's a few of you that have not put the room that you would like to join, so we will do that in a minute. Kelly, there will be a recording sent out ne later, early next week. Okay.
Could you put me in Illinois? This is Ray.
And that was
Ray?
Ray. Okay. Oh, yep. Got you.
Thank you.
Okay. For those of you that are out of our tri-state area, I would ask you to pick one of our rooms, either Illinois, Indiana, or Wisconsin. Um, and you can either go Cali, okay, Cali, Illinois. Dorothy Black, is there a room that you would like to join? Mary, is there a room you would like to join?
Illinois.
Illinois. Anne, Becca Marshall, is there a room you'd like to join? Sandra, is there a room you'd like to join?
Yes, Wisconsin.
Wisconsin, okay.
I missed